What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. The NHL offseason has been arguably one of the more exciting ones I've seen in the past couple of years. A ton of movement around the league with forward cores changing left and right. But something we don't talk about enough is some of the forward cores that aren't exactly great in this league. So today I'm going to be taking a peek at 8 NHL forward cores that I feel like, well, aren't the best right now. That doesn't mean that the future isn't going to be great, but for this upcoming season, I'm a little bit lower on them. We're going to go through each of these 8, so let's begin with my first one in number 8, the Columbus Blue Jackets. The Columbus Blue Jackets have had a very unfortunate offseason, having to trade Patrik Laine, and then of course the very sudden passing of Johnny Gaudreau. Both of these two things were sort of out of their hands, but they now have to deal with all of the aftermath from this. So let's take a peek at their forward core and see what they're exactly going to be getting this upcoming season. Unfortunately for Columbus, their forward group is just too young and too inexperienced to really be considered anything but a bottom 5 team. Adam Fantilli, when healthy, has the potential to be a star, but last year he was injured in his first year and now is going into his sophomore year, where most players typically have a sophomore slump. Boone Jenner is now going to have to step up big time with them losing 2 of their best players, and they brought in Sean Monahan, who is now going to be their top line center, and who knows what version of him they're going to get. Columbus isn't exactly set up to be a competitive team this year, and I think they know it at this point. Their prospect system is nice. Sillinger, Fantilli, Johnson, all good players for the future, but their forward core at this point, it's too inexperienced, and I think Columbus knows they're not going to be competing this year, so their whole identity this season is just going to be developing their young players, especially with the shift that they've had to make this offseason. I think that they have the worst forward core in the NHL right now. I wouldn't have put him there if they still had Laine and Gaudreau, but unfortunately things change, and again, it's not all Columbus's fault. They just kind of have to work with all of this. So Columbus is going to land at the worst forward core. It's not a bad thing. They're going to get a high draft pick and hopefully continue building this promising young roster. Next up, the San Jose Sharks. I think they're going to be amazing in a couple of years, but for this upcoming season, I'm not very impressed with their current group. Some notable offseason acquisitions include Macklin Celebrini, who they got with their first overall pick, Will Smith signing an entry-level deal after being a top 5 pick in 2023, and then bringing in free agents like Tyler Toffoli and Alex Wennberg to sort of help them with their development. The Sharks' only real offseason loss was Tomas Hertl at the deadline last year, and the real difference between them and the Blue Jackets is that they have a clear path for the future, while Columbus's future is a little bit more unknown, which is why they're a step higher than them. While I dislike their bottom 6 a lot and feel like that's going to be a huge problem for them this year, I do actually think that their top 6 has a ton of potential, and within a couple of years we could see the Sharks being one of the more competitive teams again. Unfortunately though, this season for Sharks fans, just enjoy what you're watching. You have some great players that are going to be developing, and that can be a fun thing to watch as a hockey fan, especially when you just got yourself a supposed generational talent in Macklin Celebrini with the first overall pick. Should be a fun season for you guys, but I wouldn't expect you to be anything more than a bottom 5 team. Next up, this is where I have the Calgary Flames on my list, and some might be saying that this is a hot take in the back of your mind, but personally, just hear me out because you might end up agreeing with me at the end of this. Some say that the Flames are attempting to retool, but to me it seems more like a hard rebuild. The Flames have some immovable contracts like Jonathan Huberdeau and Nazem Kadri, who just have not lived up to the contracts that they signed for this organization, and basically they sold off all of their players, including guys like Noah Hannafin, Elias Lindholm, Chris Tanev, Andrew Mangiapane, and Jacob Markstrom. The team lacks direction, but they do have a few promising young players like Sharon Govich, Kuzmenko, and Zari that could have some success down the line. The Calgary Flames' losses at the trade deadline and in the offseason and their lack of talent is what puts them so low on a list like this. They have some players who could potentially break out and do a little bit more for this organization, but I'm not going off of ifs and buts. I've seen enough from guys like Huberdeau and Kadri to basically make the assumption that they're not going to be anything more than what they've shown us over the past couple of seasons, but I do like some of their young players, so that's why I put them a little bit higher than some of the other teams. But give this a year or two. If the Calgary Flames don't get any players, I could easily see the Blue Jackets and the Sharks jumping them and then potentially having one of the worst forward groups. So not the best time for this team. Hopefully they're going into a hard rebuild and not the retool that some are suggesting, because I feel like this team just doesn't have enough to be anything more than a bottom 5 team this year. Next up, the Washington Capitals, and all of you guys are probably screaming because I know everyone's so high on the Capitals, but I don't understand understand. I don't understand. This team is so mid and it hurts to even think about. The Caps have one goal and one goal only this season, and that's to get Alex Ovechkin the goals record. Plain and simple, they're not trying to do anything else. This team is a fringe playoff team at best, and their forward core to me is just mid. I said it before and I'll say it again. Pierre-Luc Dubois comes over from LA. He was a disaster over there, so who knows if he's going to be the guy he was in Winnipeg or more like the guy he was with the Kings. Andrew Mangiapane was also added. He's a middle six forward at best. They lack a true top line center. Their middle six is underwhelming, and they just don't have enough players to be exciting this year. The aging and decline of their core players like Tom Wilson, Alex Ovechkin, Nicholas Backstrom, and TJ Oshie is really what's hurting this team. They're dumping all of their money into these players, and they're just not able to perform at the same level that they used to. I understand why people might be a little bit high on this team. There is potential, and if everything works out perfectly, maybe, just maybe, they could reach the same position that they did last year, but their division got better, their conference got better, and I just don't see them making the playoffs this year, and I'm very down on their forward core. So this is where I have the Washington Capitals. Maybe it's harsh, maybe it's a bit low, but I just don't really see the potential with this team. I think that they're going to end up being worse than they were last year. Next up is the Chicago Blackhawks, and boy, oh boy, did this team have a fun offseason. Beefing up their forward core, their top six especially, with guys like Bertuzzi, Teravainen, Mikheyev, Maroon, and Smith. They also are getting two players back from injury in Foligno and Hall as well, really rounding out this roster quite nicely. Their top six is much better this year than last year. Bedard was basically playing with AHL players based on all of the injuries that they had, but with Hall coming back, Bertuzzi and Teravainen joining this roster, I think that we're going to see the next level for Connor Bedard and this team as they move forward. Now, their bottom six is still questionable, but it is improved. I like the addition of Maroon to be kind of that gritty guy. Smith is solid on the bottom six, and this year, if everything works out, they could improve by 10 points or more, but this will still keep them out of the playoffs. A step forward for the Hawks, building in the right direction, and I really do like their forward core a lot more this year, so I place them a little higher on a list like this. Next up, the Philly Flyers, and I cannot express enough how excited I am to watch Michkov play for this organization, but let's talk about the group as a whole. The Flyers shocked us all last season by being a competitive team. I think almost everybody had them finishing as the bottom team in the Metro, but with John Tortorella as your coach, you're always going to get more out of the boys than any other coach probably would get, but their collapse towards the end of the season really just showed me the true potential of this team, and that's, I guess, no man's land, not really making the playoffs each year. Now, the addition of Michkov could be a wild card. If he pans out perfectly and everything kind of translates over, then that could be a great top six addition. But their second line is really the fun part of this roster that I enjoy watching, with guys like Tippett and Frost showing out a bit last year. Outside of Couturier, though, on their top line, there's just not enough star power there for me to really be convinced that they're going to be anything super special this upcoming season. Again, they have a lot of upside. There are some young players that are going to be exciting to watch, but they really do need to improve and develop a few more players, because as their forward core currently stands, their bottom six is dreadful, and their top six, they just don't have enough stardom to really make them a competitive team for the playoffs this year. So this is where I'm going to leave the Flyers. I think there's some room for them to grow, but there's still a bottom forward core in the league as it stands today. Next up is another hot take. This is where I have the St. Louis Blues and their forward core. Their top six is nice. I think that they have some great players. I'm very high on Robert Thomas, and I think that he's incredibly underrated as a center. Pavel Buchnevich, I love that they locked him down. I think he's a stud for them. And I do like Jordan Kyrou, even though he's inconsistent at times. I see the potential there. And as a side note, I think that Neighbors is a stud too, and he's also underrated. He's going to be a great winger for them in the future as well. But outside of those four players, I think the rest of the roster is mid. Their defense is underwhelming. Their goaltending is inconsistent. And as for the rest of their forward core, I just think that they are very below average. I think for this team, they're in no man's land. I think they need to build around Robert Thomas better. If he's your franchise guy, then make sure he knows that and put better wingers there. He's about a 60 to 70 point guy at this point, and if you want to make him elevate, you need to put him around a better winger that's going to help him elevate. That's just how it works. Unfortunately, though, I can't place them any higher. I just feel like I'm very down on them this year, and with the rest of the division getting better in the Central, I think the Blues are going to fall even more in the standings, potentially below even the Minnesota Wild this year, finishing around 6th, maybe 7th if Utah takes a jump as well. Not high on the Blues. Maybe it's a hot take. I know that this is a low spot for them, but without a real true star outside of Thomas, I just don't really see them getting anything done this year. And last but not least, I battled with this last team, but there was one more team that I feel like I needed to include on this list, and that's the Montreal Canadiens. Now, don't get me wrong. Like most of you, I am very Very excited about this young core. Cole Caulfield, Suzuki, Slafkovsky, Dach, Newhook, and Laine. There is some enormous potential here, but there's also a lot of question marks that we can't get blinded by because of all of the star power, and let's get into that a little bit. Injuries are the first thing we need to talk about. Kirby Dach is coming off a season-ending one, so his play style will change. He's going to get off to a slow start, and we've really only seen a small sample size of him with Montreal, so if everything works out great, he could be awesome for the team, but it also could be another situation where they just have an injury-prone player. Patrik Laine is in the same boat. There's a reason why the other 30 teams in the league wouldn't trade for him. He's making a lot of money and he's very injury prone. So if he's the same player that he was in Columbus, Montreal is going to have a bit of a problem. But if he does reach the upside that he had in Winnipeg, then this will be a great trade. Laine is only 26 and he does fit in perfectly with this team, but he has to be on the ice in order to be effective for the organization. The other thing, and it's a pretty big one, is the difficulty of this division. The Atlantic to me is easily the most difficult one to be in right now, and with the Habs finishing in last, Patrik Laine isn't really going to change that this upcoming season when every other team in the division got a lot better. So I'm not sure if I can place them any higher than what I have them on this list. The upside is there, and if everything works out with all of these young players, then they're going to be in a great position over the next couple of years. But for right now, I still think that they're a bottom 8 forward core in the league until we can see how players like Dach and Laine really hit the ice for full seasons. But let me know what you guys think. These are my bottom 8 forward cores in the NHL for the 2024-25 season. Who do you think should be higher? Who do you think I had too low? Were my hot takes too hot? Make sure you guys comment on all of that below. Like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Thank you guys for watching as always. I'll see you in the next one.